Good morning, everyone. It is a true pleasure having Professor Lustig here at Emery Pharma. And for those of you who are here, we're grateful for you trekking over here on this rainy, crazy day. And thank you again for coming from San Francisco. And those of you who are online, again, thank you for joining us. So Professor Lustig, I first came across his presentation at UCSF Grand Rounds and was very impressed and learned a lot about the hazards associated with sugar and fructose. Of course, as always, dose makes the poison, and it's true in almost everything. But Professor Lustig has written books, authored lots of papers. He's been at UCSF for the last 20-some years. He's a native of New York. He did his undergraduate at MIT and his medical degree at Cornell. And we're honored to have you today. And I'm going to pass on the microphone.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you for the invitation and for putting up with me today. I appreciate it. So Ron asked me to talk about chronic disease. And obviously you have more than a little bit of a vested interest in that. Well, everyone has a little bit of a vested interest in that because it's running rampant, throughout the population. Guaranteed, someone with diabetes, and even more people with heart disease. And I guarantee you, lots of people with fatty liver disease. You just don't know it because they don't know it. And all of these are, basically compounding our medical and mental health care problems to such an extent that, in fact, Medicare will be broke by the year 2029, no matter what the Republicans do. And so we've got a big problem, and we need to understand what the problem is in order to be able to fix it. And I guarantee you, the problem that you think it is not. So I'm going to try to explain to you what the problem really is today. So the title of the talk is The Subcellular Pathologies That Belie All Chronic Disease, the Hateful or Grateful Eight. And with apologies to Quentin Tarantino, who produced this movie back in 2015, I'm going to basically describe these 8 pathologies that are listed here and how they all fit in. All right, so just disclosures, to start with. I did write these books for the general public, most recent of which is Metabolical, came out in 2021, which lists all of these very, specifically. And I am also the chief medical officer for these 4 companies and a paid advisor to these other 4, and I will not be mentioning any of these for the rest of the talk. All right, this is a paper that came out in the year 2001, based on 2000 data, looking at how many diabetics there were in the world at the time. And what they said was, at that time in the year 2000, there were 151 million diabetics, and what was predicted would be that decade later, in the year 2010, we would be up to 221 million. That's a 46% increase, or an annualized inflation rate of 3.88%. This is not what we saw. What we actually saw was 285 million. That's an annualized inflation rate of 6.55%, a doubling over what was anticipated. By 2014, up to 422 million. That's an annualized inflation rate of 10.3%, a tripling over what was anticipated. So as we've learned about the obesity epidemic, as we've been, throwing obesity drugs and, various other diabetic agents and gym memberships and, everything else under the sun at the problem, it has only gotten worse. By the year 2019, we were up to 463 million, 2021, 537 million, and now what is predicted for 2030 is 568 million diabetics. WTF. Okay, what is going on, and how is it that this is just getting worse when we're actually trying to do something about it, except it ain't working? Okay, is it possible we're actually making things worse? Well, in fact, we are. And that's part of why we're doing this. And it's not just in adults. This is true in children too. Now remember, once upon a time, type 2 diabetes was called adult onset, and type 1 diabetes was called juvenile onset diabetes. But now juveniles get adult onset, so they had to change the name, right? That's the only reason they went from to type 1 and type 2, is because kids were getting it. And in fact, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, pick your demographic group, it's gone up over the last 20 years. So when kids get adult diseases, something else is going on. Kids are the canaries in the coal mine. They are more sensitive to any perturbation. And so the fact that children get adult diseases says something that children are exposed to is causing this problem. This is not a behavior problem. This is not a diet and exercise problem. This is an exposure. But what's the exposure? Now, if you look at the data on hospital costs in red, physician costs in green, and pharma costs in purple, okay, they do not add up to the total cost because the rest of it is due to the care and treatment of chronic metabolic disease, of which diabetes, of course, is the sentinel disease. And if you look at healthcare expenditure per person against life expectancy, what you'll notice is all the OECD countries, all 37 developed countries, they're sort of keeping themselves to the, within the pack here. But we fell off the rails here in 1980 and have just been going off ever since. And as you know, lifespan is actually going down for the last 5 years in a row. And this is the reason, because everyone wants the pill. And I am here to tell you there is no pill. There never will be a pill. There can't be a pill. And the reason is because there's no pill that can get to where the problem is. There is a problem, and we know where it is, and no medicine gets there. And we're going to talk about that as we go. And the only way to deal with this is prevention. But of course, nobody believes in prevention. Everybody wants the pill. So this is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse for this reason. So here's the way I think about it and the way I try to explain it to people so that they get the picture. This is a Venn diagram of the entire US population, 260 million adults, 42.4% obese, BMI over 30, 57.6 normal weight, BMI under 30. Okay, so two mutually exclusive circles. Every one of you is in one of the two circles and you know who you are. Okay? Here's what the doctors and the nutritionists and the Institute of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health and the Surgeon General and the White House and Congress and the food industry all say. They say 80% of those 42.4% obese, these 86 million people here, they're sick. They're fat and they're sick because they're fat. And if they would only just diet and exercise, we could solve this problem. Garbage. Total complete trash. Sounds right. Sounds like common sense. But it's wrong. Why is it wrong? It's on the slide. Why is it wrong? Well, it is true that 86 million people are obese and sick. That's true. Okay, but that means, and that's 80% of the total. That means 20% are not. They are metabolically healthy. We have a name for them, MHO, metabolically healthy obese. They will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They're just fat. They have increased subcutaneous fat, which turns out to be protective against chronic metabolic disease. Nothing wrong with them, other than fitting into a swimsuit. Conversely, and this is the important part, 60% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, too. Now they get it at a lower BMI. And it's true that it's 60% versus 80%. So in fact, obesity is a risk factor for chronic metabolic disease. And I don't argue that. That is absolutely true. Obesity is a risk factor, but it is not a cause. There's a difference between risk factor and cause. And what we're talking about today is cause. That's not the same. Tell the NIH. So there are plenty of thin, sick people out there, okay? And there are plenty of fat, healthy people out there. And so the question is, which are you? Well, can I prove it? And the answer is, yeah, here, I'll prove it right here. So here are two equally weighted people, CT scans through the abdomen of two equally weighted people. Notice trunk fat, 12.8, 12.8. One's healthy, one's sick. Which one's sick? B. B is sick. A, metabolically healthy obese. He's got big love handles, subcutaneous fat. Not dangerous. In fact, might be protective, in many cases protective. This guy's got fat all around his organs, intra-abdominal fat. Okay, and we have a name for this. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical term, 1,500 Medline citations, coined by Dr. Jimmy Bell at University College London, neuroimager. Okay, so my question to you, sitting here right now, all of you, are you a TOFI? How would you know? How could you know? Does your doctor know? If your doctor knows, why hasn't your doctor told you? And what would your doctor do about it if they did know? And it goes even further than that, because it turns out it's not just the visceral fat, it's the liver fat. So here's a histological micrograph of normal liver, and you can see the sinusoids and the biocanaliculi and the Kupffer cells all nicely ordered. And over here we have fatty liver disease. Okay, and you can see the fat vacuoles, and you can see the beginning of scarring, you can see all the macrophages infiltrating. Okay? Now, prior to 1980, if you saw this under the microscope, that was alcohol, alcoholic fatty liver disease. The problem is, if you look at this now in 25% of children, you will see the same thing. And children don't drink alcohol. And that is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or now a new name, metabolically associated fatty liver disease. So NAFLD, MAFLD, all the same. So the question is, how come something that causes disease in alcoholics is causing disease in children? What's that about? What's the exposure there? Because everyone's got it. 45% of adults have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, 25% of children. Now, I didn't say obese, total. In fact, fatty liver disease is now the leading cause of liver transplant in the United States, having overtaken hepatitis C. And that's not just in obese people. Now, it is true that the more obese you are, the more fatty liver disease. I'm not arguing that. Again, obesity is a risk factor. I didn't say it wasn't. It is. Okay? But you'll notice, take a look at the prevalence in the normal weight population. And that's around the world. So this is not a uniquely American problem. This is a global problem because of a global exposure. And the question is, what is that global exposure? And if you look here, here's BMI, BIND here, and this is the hazard risk ratio for fatty liver disease. And you'll notice, here's the overweight category, and you can see very clearly a signal. You can even see the signal a little bit in the normal weight category. But if you have diabetes, take a look, even in the normal weight. In fact, turns out if you have fatty liver, you are 3.5 times more likely to develop diabetes because of your fatty liver, causational. And it makes sense because, after all, when the pancreas releases insulin, where does it go? It goes to the liver via the portal vein. Now, the rest of the body, when a hormone is made, it goes into the systemic circulation, right? But pancreas goes to the liver. And the reason is because the liver is the primary target of insulin action. And so when your liver's sick, guess what? So is your pancreas. So the question is, what's going on in the liver? So here we have an obese person. Notice the love handle's on the side. But take a look at this guy's liver. Notice 2.6% liver fat. This is fine. This is MHO, metabolically healthy obese. Nothing wrong with this guy. Now take a look at this guy over here. Notice obesity, but take a look at his liver. 24% liver fat. Ground glass appearance. See? Okay. This guy's got metabolic syndrome. This guy's got NAFLD. This guy's going to die. Now take a look at this guy over here. Notice no obesity, normal amounts of sub-Q fat, but take a look at his liver. 23% liver fat. Thin sick, fat sick, fat healthy. In other words, it's not the fat you can see that counts. It's the fat you can't see, and particularly the fat in the liver that you can't see. And so the question is, how did the fat get in the liver in the first place? And why is it children have it? Right? So my point is that obesity is not the problem. It is a symptom of the problem. It is downstream of the problem. And so we are treating the symptom of the problem and not doing a very good job of it, mind you. So what is the problem? Metabolic syndrome, defective metabolic health, metabolic dysfunction. And that's where all the money goes. 75% of all healthcare dollars go to all of these diseases, of which, of course, diabetes is the sentinel disease. Now, here's the real problem. None of these diseases have any cures. They just have treatments, and in fact, the treatments don't work because they are just treating the symptoms. They're not treating the cause. Okay? It's like giving an aspirin to a patient with a brain tumor because they have a headache. Might help the headache, ain't going to do a damn thing for the brain tumor because the pathology is still there. The only way to fix the problem is to remove the pathology, not to cover it up, not to band-aid it over, but get rid of it. And we're not doing that because we don't understand it. We think obesity is the problem. No, obesity is a symptom of the problem.
Is mental health part of the issue?
Mental health is metabolic health. So anything that happens, and we're going to talk about mitochondria in a minute,
Right.
Okay? You got mitochondria in your liver, and when they don't work, you get fat in your liver.
Right.
You have mitochondria in your brain, and when those mitochondria in your brain don't work, you get mental illness.
Right.
And the same things that affect your mitochondria in your liver affect the mitochondria in your brain. So in fact, metabolic health and mental health go hand in hand, and often not just overlap, but are due to the same problem. Okay? Now, example, LDL. Everybody's chasing LDL. Everybody thinks, get the LDL down, right? And you'll fix heart disease, right? Garbage. Total garbage. Now, it is true that LDL levels do correlate with cardiovascular disease. That is true. The hazard risk ratio is 1.3. You can see it right here. Okay, 1.3. Now, the public health community has settled on 1.3 as when it's a public health issue. So if it was 1.29, it wouldn't be a public health issue, but it's right there on the edge at 1.3. And there's your data, okay, and it's true, and it does correlate. And I'm not saying it doesn't, it does, okay? But there's something that correlates way better, and that's serum triglyceride. Serum triglyceride correlates with a hazard risk ratio of 1.8, and there's the data right there, 1.8. So serum triglyceride is actually 50% more informative in terms of heart disease than is LDL. Now, it turns out your serum triglyceride is your very low density lipoproteins. It is made by the liver, and it is made from the conversion of sugar to fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Your triglycerides are your VLDL and your chylomicrons. But if you're fasting, your chylomicrons should be 0. So your VLDL and your serum triglycerides are the same, which means that your serum triglycerides are a measure of liver function. And so if your serum triglycerides are high, it means your liver is sick. If you've got fat in your liver, it means your liver is sick. And if your liver is sick, that means your pancreas is sick. And that's what drives the chronic metabolic disease. Now, we give statins for people with high LDL in an attempt to drive the LDL down because we think the LDL is the problem. The question is the LDL the problem? Well, if it were the problem, then the statins would work, but they don't. And there you can see right there, there's your diamond. On the identity line, it's not on the favorable side. There's a Cochrane review. This one's for total mortality. This one's for fatal cardiovascular events. Again, virtually non-existent, okay? And if you look at the data on LDL lowering as a primary, not secondary, but primary prevention for heart disease, like if you go to your doctor and your doctor says, oh, your LDL is high, you need a statin. That's primary prevention, okay? As opposed to, oh, you've had a heart attack. Here, you need a statin. That's different. That's secondary prevention. Everybody see the difference? Okay, so primary prevention, you're not self-selecting for people who already have a problem. When you look at primary prevention, turns out the RCTs do not show any benefit on mortality. Do you know what the mean increase in lifespan is from treating high LDL with a statin is? 4 days. 4 days. None of these trials reduced CVD events, and some of the drugs actually reported harm. This just came out 3 days ago. And so you're looking here, at all-cause mortality, and this is the degree of LDL cholesterol reduction, and it doesn't matter if it's statins or ezetimibe or diet or anything else. That's your benefit. 0. This is for myocardial infarction, okay, about a 5%, and here's for stroke, about a 2%. And more importantly, on this side we have number needed to treat. How many people do you have to treat with a statin to actually get one patient with benefit? 754. Ridiculous. Number needed to treat, maybe 10 might be cost effective. Really, 5 might be cost effective. 754, really? You get the picture. And statin use is associated with development of diabetes. And the reason is because it's a mitochondrial toxin. That's where it works. It works at 3-beta hydroxymethylglutarate CoA reductase. It's a mitochondrial enzyme, okay, causing damage. So why should you be surprised it's associated with diabetes? All right, let's take a different marker. Not LDL, let's take hemoglobin A1C. Everybody says, high hemoglobin A1C, bad. Get it down. Give insulin, give oral hypoglycemics, give glutamides, give, SGLT2 inhibitors, right? Well, here are 5 studies that show that lowering A1C didn't help, didn't make a difference in terms of morbidity, mortality. So here's the original UKPDS data, okay, looking at tolbutamide versus placebo, and the mortality rate was actually higher with the tolbutamide, and the cardiovascular disease was higher with the tolbutamide, even though the A1C went from 9 to 7. This is the famous rosiglitazone data from the New England Journal that you're all familiar with. Okay, take a look at the odds-risk ratio for myocardial infarction. Not a whole lot better, just as bad. And for cardiovascular death, 1.64. Not very good. Okay, this is the ACCORD trial, the intensive trial. It was in the New England Journal. Here's standard therapy and intensive therapy for A1C. You can very clearly see the benefit. But when you look at the primary and secondary outcomes, here's mortality. Notice intensive therapy, worse, statistically worse. And CVD death, statistically worse. So just getting the A1C down doesn't necessarily translate into metabolic and or cardiovascular benefit. So we can't fix chronic disease with medicines. We haven't been able to, we're not going to be able to. And the reason is because we are not addressing the problem. We are papering it over. Which then leads us to, well, what is the problem? And that's where this concept of the hateful or grateful 8 comes in. These are the 8 subcellular pathologies that you can't measure. In fact, there's no ICD-11 code for any of them. Your doctor can't bill for any of them. Your doctor doesn't know what the hell they are anyway. Wouldn't discuss it with a patient if their lives depended on it, because it'd basically just be blowing smoke because they can't do anything about it anyway. And so no wonder no one's heard of them or cares about them. And here they are listed. Okay? Now, some of you are medical, some of you have heard of these 8, some of you are not medical and have not heard of them. But these are what's going on inside your cells. Glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. The point is that not one of these pathways is druggable, except maybe inflammation, and that's a question mark all by itself. Depends on what's inflamed. But they're all foodable. You can use food to fix all 8 of these, and I will show you at the end how you do that. So let's start with number 1, glycation. Here we have 5 pictures of food, and they all share one thing in common, and don't say they're delicious. They're all delicious for one reason, because they're
High in fat?
nope. Coffee's high in fat.
The other stuff was.
Sugar.
They're all brown. They're all brown. Okay, they're all brown. Because the common link is the Maillard or the browning or the glycation reaction, non-enzymatic glycation. The binding of a glucose to an epsilon amino group of lysine, usually. Okay, so the way to think about this is the following. You can roast your meat at 375 degrees for an hour, or you can roast your meat at 98.6 degrees for 75 years. The answer is the same. You are browning. Sitting here right now, you are browning. You can't stop. The only way to stop browning is to be dead. But you can control the rate of browning. That's the point. Okay? Your mitochondria brown routinely. It's part of them being mitochondria. Okay? And if you don't believe me, here's newborn rib cartilage, nice and white, and here's 88-year-old rib cartilage, nice and brown. You are browning as we speak, and if you had orange juice for breakfast, you are browning 7 times faster. Now, why does this happen? Well, here's glucose. You'll notice glucose has an aldehyde group on the position 1 of the linear form. That aldehyde can bind to an epsilon amino group of lysine at position 1 on the hemoglobin molecule, which will then form a shift base, which will spontaneously decompose to form this covalent linkage, and we call this the Amadori rearrangement. And you're all familiar with that. This is what hemoglobin A1C is right here. Okay, and that's what we measure in diabetics to see how high their blood glucose has been. It correlates with the degree of blood glucose elevation. All true. Okay. Turns out fructose, the sweet molecule in sugar, does that reaction 7 times faster. Okay, I didn't include that data because I want to get through this. Number 2, oxidative stress. Every time that Maillard reaction occurs, it releases a little hydrogen peroxide, a little oxygen radical. And that oxygen radical has to be quenched by an antioxidant or it will do damage. It will cause lipid peroxidation or protein denaturation. It will do something to cause cells to be damaged and die. And this is called oxidative stress. It's the same thing that happens to nails. Nails rust, well, we rust too. The only difference is that when nails rust, it's iron oxide, and when we rust, it's these carbonyls instead. But but it's the same process, okay? And it's these reactive oxygen species, these superoxides, that cause the problem, okay? And it happens in carbohydrate and also happens in fat. And that's what causes acrylamide. And when you put carbohydrate and fat with heat, like French fries, every time that reaction, that Maillard reaction occurs, whether it's glucose going to the TCA cycle, it generates reactive oxygen species, and fructose also generates reactive oxygen species 7 times faster, causing cell dysfunction and death, unless it is quenched by an antioxidant. And the antioxidants in your cells are located in the peroxisomes. That's where reactive oxygen species go to die. So you have to have an appropriate antioxidant capacity. If you don't, you will do more damage. Well, so where do you get your antioxidants from? You get them from the air? You have to eat them. So what foods have antioxidants? Nah.
Orange juice.
Not orange juice, no.
Right? Orange juice.
Berries are good. Berries have some, yeah. Not a lot. Okay. Number 3, mitochondrial dysfunction. Now, mitochondria burn energy. And they're supposed to burn them all the way to carbon dioxide, which is the end product which we then breathe off. Okay, the question is, do mitochondria actually do that? And the answer is only when they're top flight, only when they're fit and healthy. And most of our mitochondria are not. And there are things that can interfere with mitochondrial function. So this was a study done by Samir Softic working in Ron Kahn's lab at Joslin at Harvard. And what they looked at was the difference in mitochondrial function between glucose as a substrate versus fructose as a substrate. And what they found was that glucose activated 2 enzymes that improved and increased mitochondrial beta oxidation. It increased AMP kinase, the fuel gauge on the liver cell. And AMP kinase actually is one of the signals, one of the primary signals to generate new mitochondria. I'll show you in a minute how we know that. And also, it increased this enzyme here called HADH, hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase, which is necessary for fatty acid beta oxidation. So the ultimate goal of glucose is to increase mitochondrial beta oxidation, thus the green arrow upwards here. Now take fructose. Notice fructose is in red. It's not in red because it's not green. It's red because it's a stop. Okay, because in fact, fructose inhibits 3 mitochondrial enzymes. It inhibits AMP kinase because a metabolite of fructose actually fits in the active site of the gamma subunit of AMP kinase and renders it inactive, non-competitive inhibition. It also inhibits this enzyme down here called ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary to start fatty acid beta oxidation. And lastly, because of the increase in uric acid associated with sugar consumption, the uric acid inhibits this enzyme here called CPT1A, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1A, which regenerates carnitine. And carnitine is necessary because it's the shuttle mechanism by which fatty acids get from the outside world into the mitochondria so that they can be beta oxidized. The sum total of which is that beta oxidation goes down with fructose. So the molecule sugar, dietary sugar, has glucose and fructose. What's the net effect? The net effect is actually inhibition. And this is what Ron Kahn himself said about this study. The most important takeaway of this study is that high fructose in the diet is bad. It's not bad because it's more calories, but because it has effects on liver metabolism to make it worse at burning fat. As a result, adding fructose to the diet makes the liver store more fat, and this is bad for the liver and bad for whole body metabolism. Couldn't agree more.
Are there any other good sugars?
No. There are some that are less bad.
Right.
None that are good. Some less bad.
Like glucose is good.
Ish.
Good.
It also raises your insulin, and insulin has its own effects on chronic metabolic disease. So it's a wash. Okay. Number 4, insulin resistance. Now, you all know about insulin resistance. You all heard the term. The question is, what constitutes insulin resistance? Now, it is normally assumed that obesity leads to insulin resistance. Garbage. The metabolically healthy obese demonstrate that that's not true. Now, if you look at the relationship between BMI and insulin resistance, very clearly there is this hyperbolic relationship, and that is true, there is. So the more weight you gain, the more insulin resistant you are at any given BMI. That is true, I don't argue that. However, at any given BMI, there are going to be some people who are going to be insulin sensitive, and there are going to be some people who are insulin resistant at any BMI. Okay? And so who's who in that is you don't know. That's what it comes down to. So just because you have an increased BMI doesn't mean you're insulin resistant, and just because you have a low BMI doesn't mean you're insulin sensitive. These are two separate phenomena. And when you actually look at insulin sensitivity versus resistance as the variable instead of weight as the variable, as we do here for diabetes or for heart disease, you'll notice that at any given BMI, pick your BMI, those who are insulin resistant have more diabetes and more heart disease than those who are insulin sensitive. And here's your Kaplan-Meier curves showing the rate of mortality based on insulin sensitivity here, obese or non-obese, irrelevant, versus insulin resistance here, non-obese or obese, irrelevant. In other words, it's the insulin resistance that qualifies the obesity, not the other way around. Okay? It's insulin resistance that matters. Now, how do you get that insulin resistance? Well, there are a few ways, but I'm going to show you my favorite, okay, the one I did the work on. Okay, so this is our work from UCSF. What we did was we took 43 children from our obesity program at UCSF, all with metabolic syndrome, all with fatty liver, and all high sugar consumers. And we studied them on their baseline diet, and they all had fatty liver, okay? And they all had high triglycerides, because that's what happens. What we then did was we figured out what they were eating at home on their home diet, and we put them on a diet for the next 10 days. We catered their meals. No added sugar. We took their percent calories as sugar from 28% pre-study down to 10% on study. Okay? Everybody with me? 28 down to 10. Now, if you do that, you're going to lose 350 to 400 calories a day out of the diet. And if you do that for 10 days, you might lose weight. And we didn't want our patients to lose weight. Because if they got better, people would say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. We wanted them to stay the same weight. So we had to give them back the 350 to 400 calories that we were taking out as something else. We took the sugar out, we had to put something else back in that was calorically equivalent. We gave them extra starch. We did a starch for sugar exchange, isocaloric. So in the vernacular, we took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. Everybody got it? So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them processed food, we gave them Safeway food. We gave them kid food. Food kids would eat, but it was no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale. And every day we'd call them up on the phone, what'd you weigh? And if they were losing weight, eat more! In order to keep their weight up for the 10 days. And then we studied them again at the end of 10 days. Every aspect of their metabolic health got better. Their liver fat went down 22%. Their de novo lipogenesis rate went down 46%. Their VLDL in their blood went down 49%. Their visceral fat went down 7%. And most importantly, their insulin kinetics came back to normal. We reversed their metabolic syndrome with no change in calories and no change in weight, just by getting rid of the sugar out of their diet and substituting starch. Because we stopped the liver fat, and we showed that the change in the liver fat predicted the improvement in their metabolic health. It's the liver fat people. Now, why does this happen? Well, this is what insulin resistance is. So insulin binds to its receptor on the surface of the liver cell, and there are two pathways. Not one, but two. Now, this pathway here in blue is the pathway everybody quotes. This is the metabolic side of the insulin argument, okay? And it is primarily mediated through this transcription factor here called AKT. And this is the glucose lowering part of insulin. This is what reduces hepatic glucose output. This is what causes glycogen synthesis, etc., all the above. So for lack of a better word, we can call the blue pathway good. But then you have this red pathway. And this red pathway is the cell proliferation pathway. It is the mitogenic pathway. And this pathway is the pathway that causes cancer. In fact, insulin drives cancer formation. And we now know that clinically because they've done studies on type 1 diabetics receiving insulin, and their total insulin burden predicts their risk for cancer. No surprise. Okay, everybody got the idea? So, every molecule of insulin is both good and bad. Short-term gain for long-term pain. So when you are insulin resistant, you are driving this pathway. And that's causing coronary vascular smooth muscle proliferation. It's causing glomerulosclerosis. It's causing changes in the brain consistent with Alzheimer's. This is the bad guy in insulin resistance. Number 5, membrane integrity. So the best way to explain membrane integrity is the following. You all blow up balloons when you were a kid? Like for a birthday party? So let's blow up a balloon, okay? You blow it up, okay, it gets really stretched, right? Try to poke it with a finger. It just comes straight back, right? Now poke it with a pin. Poof. Okay, fine. So let's take another balloon. We're going to blow it up to the same level, okay? And we're going to put it in the corner of our bedroom for 3 weeks. And slowly but surely, over the course of those 3 weeks, that balloon is going to deflate, right? Now take the knot out and blow up the balloon a second time to the same level. Now try to poke it with your finger. Now it's going to explode. The membrane changed in the 3 weeks that it was under stress. That's membrane integrity, or the lack of it. Well, this happens to neurons. This happens to other cells too. Okay, the composition of the plasma membrane creates this thing called membrane fluidity. And that is eminently perturbable. And when it's perturbed, it means cells die, especially neurons. Okay? Cholesterol and phosphatidylcholine are the prime determinants of membrane fluidity. And omega-3s are particularly important in stabilizing that membrane fluidity. And we know that from studies done by Fernando Gomez-Pinilla down at UCLA. And it turns out fructose, because of its effects on insulin resistance, drive changes in membrane fluidity, which can be actually ameliorated by the administration of omega-3 fatty acids, because omega-3s are part of the structural components of those membranes and help them be more flexible and more expansible. But we don't have any omega-3s in our diet. We have omega-6s, which are pro-inflammatory, which we get to next is pro-inflammation. Now, where's the inflammation coming from? Well, it can come from a whole bunch of places, of course. You know, if you have an autoimmune disease, that's pro-inflammatory. You can have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or anything like that. But the fact is that most of the inflammation in our bodies come from our intestine, from our gut. Okay? So our gut has 2 barriers that prevent all the junk in our intestine from basically taking us over. One is the mucin layer that sits on top of the epithelial cells to act as a mechanical barrier. And the other are these proteins that join the intestinal enterocytes together, known as tight junctions. So those of you familiar with the idea of celiac disease, okay, that's a defect in the zonulin, which is a tight junction protein. Okay, and so when those tight junctions fail, then stuff can enter into the portal system, go to the liver, and cause liver inflammation. So this is a primary entry point for inflammatory lipopolysaccharides, cytokines, whole bacteria that will end up having to be cleared by the liver and cause liver inflammation. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Well, it turns out fructose nitrates those tight junction proteins and causes them to be dysfunctional. In addition, fructose causes a big problem with the intestinal microbiome, which I'll show you on the next slide. But ultimately, the defect in the mucin layer that occurs because of the lack of fiber in our diet, because fiber basically protects that mucin layer. And without the fiber, the bacteria eat the mucin layer for lunch. Literally, that becomes their food, because we're not feeding them, because the fiber is the food for the bacteria. And then the fructose comes in, basically takes care of the other barrier, and so you end up with bacterial and lipopolysaccharide translocation into the portal vein, straight to the liver, causing hepatic insulin resistance, hepatic inflammation, fatty liver disease, and of course chronic metabolic disease. Okay? And this just shows that fructose is worse than glucose for immune cells. So when glucose comes in, it goes into immune cell, it goes to lactate, no problem. When fructose comes in, it doesn't go to lactate, and it actually interferes with the ability of the cell to respond to glutamine, which is actually immune suppressant. And so these immune cells get hyped up. And you can see that here in terms of TNF alpha, whether it's glucose or sucrose administration. TNF alpha goes up, IL-1 beta goes up, IL-6 goes up, and you can block that by giving rapamycin. So you know this is a protein synthetic event because of the presence of fructose in immune cells. So if we take the fructose out of the diet, does the inflammation get better? And the answer is yes, it does. Okay, and you can see that in these studies done in patients with lupus, and you can see that in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. And it turns out the rheumatoid arthritis is because of an anti-idiotypic antibody interaction between group A streptococcus and the heart and the kidney. And it turns out that group A strep grows better on fructose than it does on glucose. And you can see that here. Here's 2% fructose against 2% sucrose against glucose. And you notice that the glucose doesn't cause the bacteria to grow. It's only the fructose that causes the bacteria to grow. So we are actually making our autoimmune diseases worse by increasing inflammation in our intestines, driving hepatic insulin resistance and chronic metabolic disease. Number 7. Okay? And so if you don't have autophagy, and by the way, autophagy goes down as you age, okay, you end up with cell death, cancer, problems with your immune system, cardiomyopathy, aging, infectious disease, fatty liver, neurodegenerative diseases, etc. So you want more autophagy, you want increased autophagy, okay? Because autophagy improves health span, okay? It does all of these things, all good, okay? Improves immune responses, inflammatory responses, changes cell death rates, reduces cellular senescence, and you avoid oncogenesis, okay? And it turns out that AMP kinase I told you about, okay, when it's working, you get autophagy. When it's not working, autophagy stops. And what did I tell you about AMP kinase and fructose? It sits in the gamma subunit and causes non-competitive inhibition. So autophagy stops. So, the Hateful Eight. How do we fix it? Well, you got to know what's causing it, right? You got to have a cause in order to have a treatment. Well, the cause is right there. ultra-processed food, which now accounts for 62% of all food consumed in America and 67% of all kid food consumed in America. And here's where the sugar is, okay? Now you know about the sugary products, you know, candy, cakes, ice cream, old news. Beverages, old news, okay? So this part you know about, but it's also in the fruits and the vegetables, the starchy foods, the meat, fish, and eggs, dairy products, fats and sauces, salty snacks, and everything. And it's there on purpose because the food industry knows when they add it, you buy more because it's also addictive. That fructose molecule stimulates dopamine in the reward system and causes you to say, this feels good, I want more. And so you eat more. And the food industry, of course, knows that. Processed food increases BMI, no surprise. In Europe, okay, 19 countries, the percentage of ultra-processed food consumption correlates with the percentage of obesity, okay? And also correlates with mortality rates as well for exactly the same reason. Now, a lot of people say, it doesn't matter if it's high fat or high carb. Okay? The Diet Fit study that done by Christopher Gardner at Stanford ultimately showed the exact same effect, except that all of them, both the high fat and the high carb diet he gave, was a real food diet. So I'm not so concerned about the fat or the carb as I am about the degree of processing. Because processed food is high in sugar, low in fiber. High in sugar for palatability, low in fiber for shelf life. The problem is the fructose in the sugar causes the metabolic damage. The lack of fiber in the processed food causes the inflammatory damage. You put the metabolic damage with the inflammatory damage, you have chronic metabolic disease. And there is no medicine for either of those. Cannot be fixed. This just shows what happens with fiber. So here's glucose excursions in diabetics on a normal diet, and here's glucose excursions in diabetics on a low-carb diet. Much better, right? That's why everybody's saying low-carb diet for diabetes. I understand that. But here's what happens on a high-fiber diet. Not on a low-carb diet, but a high-fiber diet. Same thing. And the reason is because you're preventing the glycemic excursions. Because when you consume your food with fiber, called real food, those calories, those glucose molecules end up not being for you. They are for your microbiome. Your microbiome chews them up because you have prevented their early absorption, because the fiber acts as a gel, a lattice work on the inside of your intestine, coating the inside of your intestine. Soluble and insoluble fiber together prevent the transport of glucose, fructose, sucrose, simple starches from the intestine, from the lumen, into the portal vein, so that your liver never sees them. And because they go further down the intestine, even though you ate them, you didn't get them. So who cares what passes your lips? What you really care about is what passes your intestine. So calories are what passes your lips. Who gives a flying shit? Excuse my French. My job is to kill the calorie. I want to kill the calorie as a unit of measure because it never made sense. And it's actually taken us and made us, miss the mark for just that reason. Okay, so the Hateful and Grateful Eight. Here they are. None of them have any medicines that work except diet. That's the only thing that does work. So glycation is driven by carbohydrate, fructose, and lack of fiber. Oxidative stress driven by glucose and fructose. Mitochondrial dysfunction is driven by fructose, omega-6s, trans fats, and lack of micronutrients. Insulin resistance driven by fructose and branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine, present in corn-fed beef, chicken, and fish. Corn-fed. Membrane instability, lack of omega-3s. Inflammation due to carbohydrate and gluten in some. Omega-6s, fructose, and lack of fiber. Epigenetics methylation, lack of folic acid and B12. And finally, autophagy, frequent feeding and lack of fiber. Now, people say, can't I exercise it off? What if I just outrun my bad diet? You cannot outrun a bad diet. And the reason you can't is because 4 of the 8 are not amenable to exercise. In fact, oxidative stress actually gets worse with exercise, not better. Okay? Glycation is not amenable to it. Membrane instability is not amenable to it. Methylation is not amenable to it. Okay? Is exercise good? Sure. I'm not against exercise, I'm for it. But if you think that exercise can somehow mitigate the effects of a bad diet, you got another thing coming. Ain't gonna work. And that's what the data show. So here's what our sugar consumption has done over the past 200 years. Our ancestors getting fruits and vegetables and the occasional honey out of the ground and out of trees consumed about 5 pounds of sugar per year. So here's the 19th century with the growth of the sugar industry, C&H and Domino and Texas, Louisiana, Hawaii. And here's stabilization when price equaled demand, but the sugar was still in 5-pound bags in, grocery stores. Okay? Here's the rationing of World War II right here. And then we went back up to the same level, but then we have the advent in 1960s of ultra-processed food, which sent consumption soaring. And then, of course, we had the sugar for fat debacle of the 1970s. And we also had the introduction of high fructose corn syrup, which made things go even higher. And so we have increased our consumption of this molecule fructose by 25-fold, not 25%, 25-fold. And the question is, what kind of effect can that have on you? And the answer is, it's affecting all of these pathways that we have just talked about. What I've now done is I have overlaid on this slide the percent of GDP spent on healthcare for the same period of time. And you'll notice that when processed food came in, that's when our healthcare costs started to climb out of control. And this is what we give to poor people. This is food from a food bank. Wonder why? Any question about why the poor get sicker? Because their food sucks. But we make it suck. It's not because there's anything wrong with poor people. It's because there's something wrong with the food for poor people.
What about artificial sweeteners?
So, everybody wants to know about artificial sweeteners, appropriately so. Short answer, half as bad. So we actually have the data now. The toxicity of 1 Coca-Cola equals the toxicity of 2 Diet Coca-Colas. Half as bad. Now, half as bad does not mean good. It means half as bad. Right? And if you drink 10 Diet Cokes thinking, well, I'm not getting any fructose, I'm not getting any calories, then it will be 5 times worse. Okay? And that's what people do, of course. Now, the question is, why are diet sweeteners bad? And the answer is twofold. 1, changes the microbiome and leads to inflammation and glucose intolerance by itself, not related to fructose. And number 2, when you put something sweet on the tongue, tells the brain, sugar's coming, brain tells the pancreas, release the insulin anyway, even though it's not sugar, even though it's 0 calories. You get the insulin response anyway. And it's the insulin response that drives the chronic inflammation, cell proliferation. And so you haven't gotten rid of that. So, Hippocrates famously said, let thy food be thy medicine. Yeah, but Hippocrates never met McDonald's. If he had, he might have said something different. He might have said, good food is medicine, bad food needs medicine, and guess what? The medicine doesn't even work. And so don't expect this problem to get better anytime soon until we, as a society, recognize what the problem is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.